Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining in. And it's great to have you listening in to this discussion. My name is Lavetna Langiseru, and I'm one of the youth vice chairs of the UN Food System Summit. I work under the Action Track 3 on boosting nature positive production. Today, as we celebrate the World Day to combat desertification and drought, we have two incredible gentlemen who join me to share their work, share their experience and perspective on this topic. And on this discussion, I have Mr. Ibrahim Thor, who is the Executive Secretary of the UN Convention Combating Desertification. Our next guest speaker is Mr. Marco Lambertini from the World Wildlife Fund. So to set the scene, I would like to invite the two speakers to introduce their respective organizations and the work that they do to tackle desertification and drought. Let's begin with Mr. Ibrahim, and we'd love to hear from Mr. Marco Lambertini next. Thank you.
The UN Convention to Combat Desertification is the only global treaty dealing with land. And land degradation is a serious issue in the world. But when land degradation happens in dry lands, it's called desertification. This is why the name of the convention is the Convention to Combat Desertification, but it is dealing with land degradation in general, especially after the Sustainable Development Goals adopted Goal 15 and Target 3, which is land degradation neutrality. So we are dealing with issue of land and how land can continue to support our economic development in the world and our well-being as humanity.
WWF is a global federation of national organizations coming together, united by one mission, and the mission is of halting and reversing the degradation of the natural world with a vision of a future where people and nature live in harmony. And so the discussion around desertification and droughts it's a key element of achieving the vision and the mission. Desertification and droughts are, first of all, a major direct cause of loss of natural habitats, loss of biodiversity, and loss of ecosystem services that maintain the stability of the biosphere as a whole, and also is increasingly clear they're vital to our lives, our health, our economy. And also they are the root causes of desertification and droughts are the same that actually drive impact on nature more generally and globally. And so I think, for example, of unsustainable agriculture or forestry or mining in particular. And so tackling desertification and droughts and their root causes is key to conserve biodiversity.
One of the consequences of the loss of habitat that Marco mentioned, the loss of biodiversity and so forth, is the impact on human beings. So when 3.2 billion people are directly or indirectly affected by land degradation, it's 40% of humanity that is affected by drought, desertification, and land degradation. Because we are a terrestrial species, as human beings, we live on land. So therefore, land provides us with the food we eat. 99.9% of the food we eat is coming from land. Land provides us with the water we drink, clean water. Drinking water is coming from land. So it is extremely important. Of course, part of the air we breathe is also coming from land. So therefore, when you have a healthy land, you have healthy communities, healthy ecosystems, and therefore we are living in harmony with nature. So it is extremely important to maintain that relationship that we have with nature. Any disruption, any major disruption we have on land and land degradation, like when there's drought, when there's forest fire, is actually hell for many communities because they have nothing else to live on than what is provided to them by land, be it agriculture or livestock or continental fisheries. So it is certainly something that is affecting humanity, and when we care about land, we care about ecosystems and we care about people.
And if I may add something to what Ibrahim just said, because it's a really important point. It's a fundamental point. And I think, Ibrahim, in my view, it's something that has really evolved as a new awakening, a new understanding of the dependency, in fact, that we have on nature. Until nature was plentiful and rich, and there was no problem. We've been taking from nature, not particularly considering the consequences. But now the pressure is so high, and natural systems are beginning to degrade, are beginning to weaken. Actually, we are beginning to understand that we are paying a price for it. And as you say, nature conservation is not anymore just, which is still very important, just a moral duty towards the natural world, because we don't own this planet. It's not our planet. It's a planet we are a host of. It's actually increasingly an economic issue, a development issue. Nature conservation is an issue that deals with our health, well-being. So it's an issue that actually is relevant to people as much as the rest of life on the planet. So that's, I think, is a major shift of the last few years, where we're beginning to understand the importance of maintaining, of halting degradation of land, as well, of course, in the ocean as well, for our own future, not just for the future of pandas and tigers that we all love, but is actually for our own future.
The good news, in all of this is that we can restore land, we can restore nature, and it is not even expensive. It can be as inexpensive as $40, $100 per hectare to restore degraded land. It can be much more expensive, but it is really accessible. It is democratic. You don't have to have a PhD, to do land restoration. You don't need high tech. It is really low tech. It can be done by any community in the world, and it is accessible. Now, the multiple effects it provides to humanity is such things like poverty alleviation. When you restore land, you actually combat poverty, because you produce more food, you protect your animal, your livestock and traditional way of living. It is, land restoration is also a major contributor to climate, to resolving the climate crisis, because as you restore land, you store carbon back on the soil. It is a major contributor to biodiversity. When you restore ecosystems and habitat, you actually bring biodiversity back. It is a major contributor to the economy. As you build your resilience, as you restore your land, you can produce more food. It reduces the risks of irregular migration. What is left to anybody to do when their land is not productive anymore? They flee. There's no other way. So by restoring land, you actually contribute to multiple other sustainable development goals. So it is certainly a unifier. It is not, it is something that can unite us. It is not really controversial. It is cheap, probably the cheapest solution to climate, certainly much cheaper to do land restoration and to store the carbon than to do the carbon capture and storage that requires a lot of technology. So you look at it from different perspectives. This UN decade on ecosystem restoration is a wonderful opportunity for us to close that loop and to close that gap, and not to continue the way we have been dealing with, because the linear exploitation of nature that we have done so far, which is basically mining, extraction, use, and we discard, that is not viable anymore.
And I think the point you're making connects to the fact that what is exciting today, we understand the whole interconnectivity of all these different issues. So, as you say, protecting nature, managing land properly helps with a lot of the challenges that we're facing as a society, from poverty to hunger, malnutrition, and when we talk about biodiversity, too often we talk about pandas, like the logo of WWF, or elephants, which of course are part of biodiversity and under threat. But biodiversity is also the pollinators that pollinates 2/3 of our crops, or the fish in the rivers and lakes and in the ocean that sustain hundreds of millions of livelihoods and provide good nutrition for hundreds of millions of people, billions of people. So, we got to just begin to understand that we depend on nature more than nature depends on us, in fact. And so managing land, restoring what we degraded, It's a fundamental part of our development program plan that will allow us to have a safer future as we move forward.
That's absolutely right. I don't think nature needs us. We need nature. Nature can do without us. So I think it is certainly an understanding that we all need to have, that there is no disconnect between climate, biodiversity, poverty, land. It is because we have one planet, and we have to take it as a whole. We have to have that holistic approach, just to understand that the day of a farmer cannot be divided into biodiversity sections or land or poverty or whatever. It is a full day. And as humanity, we have to have a comprehensive approach. We as consumers have a role to play. We as producers have a role to play. It is not only for governments or private sector. We tend to basically push these issues down to them. It is our role as humanity. And the hope that we all have, is the awakening that is happening in the world today, with all of these young people who are saying, you have messed up. We need to start fixing now. Now we have 10 years to fix it. We have this window of 10 years, which is the decade of action for the SDGs, and now the UN decade for ecosystem restoration.
And I think we are beginning to be clear, exactly as you say, on the timeline, which is exactly this decade. And it is terrifying on one hand, but we know it's possible. We know it's possible to reverse nature loss and begin to be on a pathway to a carbon neutral world and a nature positive world by the end of the decade, through conserving what's left. There are plenty of nature still on the world, and we need to stop losing that nature. So we need to protect what's left. We lost about half of the natural habitats on the planet, particularly on land, and we got to stop that loss. The second one is, of course, managing sustainably the rest. And so bring nature back into farmlands, into agriculture, using less aggressive agriculture towards soils, towards pollinators, and biodiversity in general. And then, of course, as you said, Ibrahim, this is a decade of restoration as well, because we have lost a lot. We have degraded a lot. I think over half of the farmland is degraded today. It's not producing its full potential, simply because we haven't treated it right. And so we can restore all this land, as you say, with big returns on investment. And so a mix of conservation of what's left, of sustainable management of the rest, plus restoration of what is possible. It's the three kind of pillars of achieving a carbon neutral and nature positive world by the end of the decade.
In light of some of the challenges that confront us today, in terms of not only climate change but also drought and water scarcity, how does this impact food security and the food that we put on our plates, and the work that your respective organizations are doing to combat this? Marco, would you like to tackle this question first, and then we'll come to Mr. Ibrahim?
I will highlight particularly, thank you for the question. I think that's a super important one, because I would like to highlight the fact that the relationship between food systems, food production and consumption, and climate change and biodiversity loss and droughts and desertification is today locked into a vicious cycle, where basically everything is reinforcing negatively everything else. So climate change is triggering desertification and droughts. They are affecting food production. The reaction of the food system is to produce more food more aggressively, that exacerbate climate change and impact biodiversity, and the consequences increases the impact on droughts and desertification. We got to break this vicious cycle by conserving the nature that's left, I was saying before, by restoring and by adopting practices that are actually driving towards a carbon neutral and nature positive future. And we know that's possible. We know it's possible to use the land in a less aggressive way, in a more natural way. We know it's possible through both technology and practices of agroecology to rediscover a different way of making land productive and generate crops that are able to feed the world. And it's a mix of changing the way, the approaches we are having in producing food, from diversification of crops to, as I said, embracing nature-friendly practices, to also changing the financial flows in support of these new approaches. Today, there are plenty of money going in the wrong direction, in the direction of supporting an unsustainable agriculture that it is degrading the land. And so, similarly to what we are doing with energy, where we are moving away from fossil fuel, supporting, incentivizing financially the use of renewable energy, same needs to happen on the food production, because that's one of the main driver of land degradation, and then there is the consumption side, and so shifting to sustainable diets as much as possible is the other side of the response.
Thank you, Mr. Lambertini, and as we move on, Mr. Ibrahim. Mr. Lambertini touched upon, the vicious cycle that reinforces some of the negative impacts that are already, exacerbating the current challenges. From your perspective, what are some of the strategies as well as some of the solutions that UNCCD is pursuing with member states as well as some of the corporate companies to address this?
Yeah, thank you. As Marco said, 40% of our land is used today for food, feed, and fashion. Now, let's not forget the clothes that we wear are coming from land. Animal feed is also mostly coming from land and is a major source of deforestation in the world. So 40% of the land, 70% of the water we use is now used for agriculture. Now, how can we transform that into a virtuous cycle? It's a vicious cycle at the moment. How can we transform that? There are 1,500 techniques and technologies that are available today for land restoration. They are various and they are accessible. They are democratic. They are easy to replicate. Now, I will give you the example of agroforestry. You can produce food while at the same time having trees on your land. And these trees will actually capture carbon. They will protect your soil from erosion. They would bring the water table probably up rather than taking it down. So you have a number of techniques that are being used today. So it is, in my view, possible over the next decade, which is the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, to transform that approach, to use these new technologies and to continue to live a decent life. It is land restoration and nature conservation does not go against economy. According to some studies, every single dollar invested in ecosystem restoration and in land restoration can bring up to $30. So in a way, it is good business to do restoration, $30 of ecosystem services. So it is good business. So if you are thinking about long term and about 2030 to 40, 2050 for the next generations, you can reverse the current trends. So we live in a world where we have a window of 10 years to reverse these trends. That's basically the message. So the situation at the moment is not good, but it is still possible to redress it. It is still, we as human beings, we can still change the course. The curve, we can still turn the tide. So we should actually focus on doing rather than just on repeating the same statistics and mistakes we have about the mistakes we made in the past. Let's now see how we can build a momentum and change the narrative into a positive narrative, a narrative of action.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim. And I love that analogy about, turning the tide and turning that, changing the narrative. And you've given a few practical examples of what we can do to, to restore land and the economic benefits to that. And I guess one of the challenge to that as well is how do we get this message out to businesses to tell them that there's, an economic benefit or value to restoring land. We're going to move on to the next question. And, the world today has more than ever before, has a wide or more than half of the population who are, young people. And, they are looking up to the leaders of today who are making decisions about the planet, about land, and also, ocean and climate change. What are some of the key actions that youth and individuals can take to drive change at the individual and collective level? And I'll probably move to Mr. Ibrahim if you could answer that, and then we'll come to Mr. Mako.
I'm really very happy that you are talking about the youth and the new generation, because we see cohorts of ecopreneurs coming in the world and clearly understanding that message of $1 invested in ecosystem restoration, bringing up to $30. I mean, it's a new thinking, and they are occupying that niche. So the hope is that they will be able to combine land restoration, food production, renewable energy in rural areas, being able to process the food, being able to create jobs, being able to recover from the post-pandemic, from the pandemic disaster we went through, and to rebuild the economies, but do it in a sustainable way. They can still live a decent life. I repeat, they can still be, very happy with their life without necessarily destroying the environment, without creating the challenges that we face. We have learned lessons. We have to basically reset the way we do business. And this is not really words. It should be action. It should be new thinking. It is a new way of life. We have to, because otherwise we are going into a war. So I know it is possible to achieve the net zero that people are talking about. It is possible to, you see a number of policies coming now, starting with the negotiations with the COPs, but you also have national policies. Every day you see this being built up. You see people requesting or demanding that their governments change their policies. You see elections being affected by the new change of mindset. Voters basically expressing themselves. Governments will listen to that, because they will be elected or not, depending on whether you see consumers demanding a more sustainable products. They want to see where the products are coming from. So either business respond to that, or they will be voted out. They will be out of business. So these new ecopreneurs are pushing the door, and a new wave is coming forward, and certainly a number of business people in the world understand that, and they want to change. They are not all bad guys. Let's stop this narrative. They want to do a sustainable business, and they want to do a business that is compatible with a sustainable planet.
The point I would like to stress on this is, first of all, that individual actions are so important. There's always a danger to think, oh, what difference can I make? Think what action you take and multiply that by almost 8 billion, and you will understand that actual individual actions can make a huge difference. Consumption, it's the fundamental problem in large part of the world, particularly in the richer economy, where in the richer part of the world, we definitely are consuming too much. And so consume sensibly, particularly and sustainably, particularly choosing sustainable food, which is one of the biggest driver today of environmental impact, including desertification and droughts indirectly, but also other commodities like timber and more, fish from the ocean. Let's consume sensibly and sustainably. Let's choose and remember that at the end of the day, the power, our real power, is in the life we conduct. It is in the choices we make in terms of what we buy, what we consume. That's really, I would say, the most important contribution that each one of us can do in our daily lives, and reduce the waste that is not so necessary in so many ways. You know, we, as I said, there's an element, there is an addiction to overconsumption in many parts of the world, and by doing so, we are going to rebalance the distribution of resources more easily towards the regions of the world that actually do need to receive more support, and where people still struggling. You know, the paradox of today is that we are wasting losing and wasting 1/3 of food globally, while there are still almost 1 billion people go hungry every day, and that's just unethical. It's nonsense. It's wrong, and it's creating all these social issues and tensions that ultimately are going to affect society as a whole. So, focus on consumption sustainably, sensibly, and remember that your individual actions can make a big difference, multiplied by 8 billion.
And if I can add to that, you know, of the close to 1 billion people, it was less, but with the pandemic, probably the numbers will go up again to close to 1 billion people that are going to bed hungry every day. You know, the irony of that is that some of these people, they actually produce, and they produce painfully just to lose part of it due to either lack of energy to conserve food, or to lack of access to market because there are no roads for them to access to market. So again, we live in a paradox where we spend billions of dollars to provide them with some food which is not necessarily adapted to their culture and so forth, but we are not spending as much money to see how they can conserve the food that they produce themselves. So again, we don't have to go far to find a solution. The solution can be local. And the other irony is that the energy that is destroying their food, which is essentially sun and the heat, that same energy can be harnessed to actually conserve the food. Just change the paradigm and see that there are multiple solutions. If we are able to just save 50% of the food that is lost post-harvest in the developed world, we will save millions of tons, and we will save millions of people from hunger from around the world, while at the same time promoting the economy, while creating jobs, while helping them create value chains and so forth. So the resources are there. We are not deploying them in full towards the virtuous cycle that we talked about. So it is not only about land in our case, it is not only about ecosystems, but it is about having a holistic approach. By the way, if you promote renewable energy and wind and solar, you reduce carbon emissions. So it's really win-win-win situation if you look at it from that point of view.
And maybe if I may add one final comment about a message to younger people on listening and engaging in this conversation is on one hand, I think you should be angry for what's happening in the world. I think the current development model is showing its limits and its craziness and has to change. And so you need to be angry for what's happening in the world, for the way we're treating the planet and the consequences we are creating for ourselves. But on the other hand, you should also be extremely excited because we've never been clearer about the problems than we have today. Science has never been clearer. Awareness has never been greater. I think we already have started the reflection that is leading to a transition. And so focusing on accelerating that transition towards better ways to develop, to consume, to produce as a civilization vis-a-vis the health of the planet, it's happening, and that transition can only be accelerated by your generation today. So I think you should be angry, but don't be depressed. On the contrary, be very excited because change is at hand.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you, Mr. Ibrahim. I do totally agree with you that my generation has is angry, but also has been hopeful because of the energy and the enthusiasm, the innovative ideas and solutions that young people across the world are generating. And I just want to go back to what Mr. Ibrahim had mentioned early on, which was around local solutions. And I come from a small island developing states, so we don't really experience desertification except probably droughts, which are now exacerbated by extreme weather events, prolonged periods of sunshine. And so one of the things that I've noticed is how we can really learn a lot from indigenous communities in terms of sustainably managing and also protecting and restoring nature and land. And so it's those kind of things that we really also need to reflect on indigenous practices that can really that we can be scaled up to protect our land. So thank you once again, Mr. Ibrahim and Marco for responding to
Can I just interject there? I don't know which Pacific island you are coming from, but if you take Earth as a cake and you divide that cake into 4 parts, 3/4 of that cake have already been altered in terms of because of human activities. So you may not be experiencing desertification because you are not living in a dry land or subhumid or dry, but you are experiencing land degradation. And my argument to small island developing states is that the really scarce resource that they have and the most precious resource that they have is actually land, because they have a lot of water around them. What they are really lacking is land. And that small piece of land, if you lose 1 hectare of land in a small island, the consequences may be much larger than a country as large as Canada, because they have another space. They can move to another space. You cannot, because you are living in such a tiny piece of land that you have to. There is no other choice. Otherwise, the consequences will be much more severe in a small island developing states than in a large country. Marco, thank you very much. It was a good conversation. We should certainly do this more often, probably in using different formats, but nice to talk to you.
Ibrahim, thank you for the invitation. This is always a pleasure talking to you, and you represent such an important component of the sustainable agenda. So anytime we'll be super happy to support, engage. You call, we'll respond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much once again, Mr. Ibrahim, and thank you, Mr. Marco, for your valuable insights and for your valuable perspective on this work to combat desertification and drought across the world. And you've really, left us with some really powerful messages to all key stakeholders, whether they are the corporates, whether they're governments or young people. So thank you once again.
Land degradation through desertification and drought does not exist by itself. It is a crisis that is inseparable from biodiversity loss. Consequently, our solutions must simultaneously address both of them. Solutions that contribute to combating desertification and biodiversity loss can include restoring degraded lands, agroforestry, and other agroecological and ecosystem-based adaptation practices. On this World Day to combat desertification and drought, we are reminded that we build back better with healthy land. This reminds us that green recovery not only means building a resilient economy, it also means ensuring that we have resilient ecosystems. The key words for the day: restoration, land, recovery. We know that investing in health, land helps create jobs and safeguarding livelihood. It also helps to reduce the risks from future crises caused by biodiversity loss, climate change, and pandemic outbreaks. Healthy and more biodiverse terrestrial ecosystems are critical if we are to achieve land degradation neutrality. The United Nations Decade on Ecosystems Restoration presents a unique opportunity to scale up our efforts to prevent, halt, and reverse the loss and degradation of all ecosystems, including those suffering from desertification and drought. The Convention on Biological Diversity is proud to continue working with the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification to address the interconnected crisis of land degradation and biodiversity loss. Let us take this day to reflect about the future of our land and then act to ensure that with healthy land, we build back better. Thank you.
La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. In dryland Africa, communities are facing several challenges. With climate change, we have high temperature. We have a loss of fertility of the soil, whereas floodings and drought, which affecting the crop production. It means lots of food, lots of income for the communities, and then also increased food and nutrition insecurity. Trade is part of this initiative, this great initiative for Africa. The change will be to see a greener Africa. Greener Africa means that we provide more trees with more possibilities for the communities to be more resilient to climate change. When you are seeing a regreening of your environment, it means that life is improving. Life is becoming better for the community.
In this post-COVID-19, I cordially extend my warm message of encouragement to all friends of mine in UNCCD and fellow friends of CSOs around the world. In retrospect, we failed in managing the land and biodiversity as well as the climate change in the past. In the post-COVID-19, I and my future forest will further extend its efforts hand in hand with UNCCD and other CSO alliance for better management of the land, extending Great Green Wall, Green Coal, and so forth beyond Chinese desert to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. I wish you all in the post-COVID-19. Thank you.
His Excellency, Executive Secretary Mr. Ibrahim Thau, Associates from Ministry of Environment of Costa Rica, eminent guest intellectuals, youth veterans, my colleagues, and all responsible citizens who are watching this program today across the world. As a president of COP UNCCD, I feel privileged and elated to welcome all of you on the occasion of virtual celebration of Desertification and Drought Day for 2021. I look forward to express myself on this global platform saying that the land is a fundamental building block that is integral to all air, water, nutrition and energy cycles. It is both a resource and a sink of GHG gases. Celebration of Desertification and Drought Day is surely going to bring a desired focus and vigor to this year's theme, Restoration, Land Recovery. With the slogan of We Build Back Better, I am very sure that we will achieve much progress during the year. We are at the onset of United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. 10 actions have been coined to execute the strategy. One of them is celebrate the culture of restoration. In this context, I would talk about circular economy, that is future to economy, social and environmental sustainability, which aims at eliminating waste and reuse of resources. This regenerates approach help in preservation and conservation of the land and environment of our planet Earth. India has been at the forefront of bringing of land degradation to the core of relevant international alliance. And our Prime Minister Narendra Modi declared India's target of restoration of 26 million hectares of land for restoration. The achievement of land degradation neutrality would be effectively augment India's commitment to achieve an additional 2.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through additional forest and tree cover. India takes pride in using remote sensing and space technology in multiple applications, including land restoration. India would be happy to help other friendly countries develop land restoration strategies using cost-effective satellite and space technology. The day reminds us of the fact that avoiding, halting, and reversing land degradation is attainable through pragmatic problem solving. Effective community participation and cooperation at all levels with this spirit. I wish you all to take effective measures that facilitate the development and adoption of nature-based strategies for global scale land restoration and promote indigenous techniques of drought management. Lastly, I urge all members to set their target of land restoration and land degradation neutrality. We must regard land as a community to which we all belong, not as a commodity. We must work with all sincerely and integrity to make it sustainable, and that serves as the fundamental basis for all our future generations to thrive. Thank you and all the best.
వస్తుంది సార్ జీవామృతం స్ప్రే చేయడం వల్ల. వర్షం కూడా లేకపోయినా ఈ మల్చింగ్ ద్వారా అది ఎప్పుడు పచ్చగానే ఉంటుంది, కాయ పూత ఎప్పుడు జరుగుతూనే ఉంది సార్. మాకు 25 రకాలు రోజు కోయడం రోజు అమ్మడం జరుగుతుంది సార్. రోజు డబ్బులు రావడమే జరుగుతుంది. అందువలన ఈ 50 సెంట్లు 60.
There has never been a more urgent need to restore and heal our ecosystems. The healthier our ecosystems are, the healthier the planet and its people. This year, the Desertification and Drought Day, with its slogan, Restoration, Land, Recovery, is particularly significant. Restoration stimulates investments and creates jobs primarily in rural areas and helps to secure livelihoods of local communities. It is a key nature-based solution to climate change impacts and can help support a green and resilient recovery to the COVID-19 pandemic. 2021 also marks the start of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. The GEF is a proud global partner of this initiative. Today, 115 countries has committed to restore approximately 800 million hectares of land, and more than half of the world's restoration pledges are now tied directly to the UNCCD's land degradation neutrality targets. This is very much in line with the GEF vision to restore healthy and resilient ecosystems. The GEF plans to continue and expand its support for restoration in our next funding cycle, GEF 8, and beyond towards 2030. A particularly important partnership platform is the Great Green Wall Initiative in the Sahel, which has landscape restoration at its core. The Great Green Wall Initiative aligns very well with the GEF integrated approach to address land degradation, desertification, and drought issues, and at the same time contributes directly to the 2030 global agenda of the SDGs. Such promising examples must be applied globally to make a lasting change. The GEF stands ready to work with the UNCCD and all its partners to achieve healthy and resilient landscapes for the benefit of the planet and its people. Thank you so much.
We live in an era of unprecedented, accelerating, destructive human impact on the planet, but also an era of a new awakening. We've been taking nature for granted. We've been treating natural resources like expendable commodities. But now more than ever before, we're beginning not only to understand the impact we are having, but also the dangerous consequences this is having on us, our lives, our economy, well-being, our health. Climate change, biodiversity loss, exacerbating impacts like droughts and desertification, land degradation more in general, and also reducing our ability to adapt to these impacts. We have to rebalance our relationship with the planet. And in order to do so, we need governments, business, investors, and consumers to pull together in delivering a new nature-positive 2030 global goal for nature, so that by the end of the decade, we have more healthy nature than today, no less. It is crucial, it is possible, and most importantly, it is necessary.
USAID Kenya and East Africa has been supporting efforts that strengthen health and nutrition systems in drought-affected areas as part of its humanitarian assistance. This is to mitigate the effects of recurrent natural hazards and spur economic growth.
Land is incredibly scarce and precious. It provides us with so much, such as our food, living space, and regulation of the climate and our water supply. Globally, we have only roughly 1.5 hectares per person, and we are letting this land degrade rapidly. Today, more than a third of all land is degraded. 40% of our land is drylands, most of which is rangelands. And 17% of these rangelands are classified as key biodiversity areas, and they are therefore important for nature and society. Only 12% of rangelands are recognized as protected area, and in fact, rangelands face neglect worldwide. Restoring land through nature-based solutions like sustainable agriculture and ecosystem restoration, and scaling up good practices to sustainable land management are imperative to restore land health. Land restoration can only be achieved when multiple stakeholders work together, including public sector, local land managers, the private sector, and non-governmental organizations. This Desertification and Drought Day, IUCN calls for increased commitment of all stakeholders to dryland restoration as a key way to accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals.
We all recognize the health impact of tobacco, which kills more than 8 million people annually around the world. What is less well known is how tremendously destructive tobacco cultivation and tobacco use is for the environment. The production of tobacco and tobacco products causes widespread environmental degradation. It begins with the preparation of land for tobacco cultivation and carries through the life of these products as they are manufactured, marketed, and consumed. In order to meet the demand for land needed for tobacco cultivation, forests are frequently cleared and burned. Often, this land is of marginal value for agriculture, and after only a few seasons, the land is abandoned, contributing in many cases to desertification, in which once fertile areas become increasingly arid. Tobacco farming is also associated with other forms of land degradation, including soil erosion, reduced soil fertility and productivity, and the disruption of water cycles. Tobacco causes soil erosion because it's usually planted as a single crop, leaving topsoil poorly protected from wind and water. Desertification from tobacco cultivation has been observed in numerous countries, including Brazil, Cuba, India, Jordan, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. Tobacco control, in particular supporting economic alternatives to tobacco growing, can help restore biodiversity and protect land resources while advancing other important development objectives, for example, increased food security. In line with Articles 17 and 18 of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the Secretariat of the WHO FCTC, as we call the convention, is urging governments to better regulate tobacco agriculture and to help tobacco farmers worldwide switch to environmentally friendly alternative crop production. The Secretariat is delighted to participate in the 2021 Desertification and Drought Day campaign to help raise awareness on this important issue. Replacing tobacco farming with sustainable and alternative agricultural production is a smart choice that we can make for the environment, the economy, and, of course, for our health. What is good for you is good for the land and for the planet. Thank you.
The project started in 5 cities in 2017, and it was quite a surprise during the pandemic. It actually has now exploded to over 400 Canadian cities that have participants that are keen to make their communities healthier and greener. And they do that by finding native wildflowers and shrubs, the plants that bees and butterflies depend on, and they get neighbors and friends to plant them throughout their neighborhoods.
A major area of our work is research and monitoring, and getting our partners engaged in not only doing conservation and educating people about monarchs, but also learning about how we can do conservation better.
Y el problema que teníamos aquí en 2012 es que estas 4.2 hectáreas eran 4.2 hectáreas de desierto. El problema más grave que teníamos era que son fincas o eran fincas sobretrabajadas o sobreexplotadas con químicos, herbicidas, fungicidas. podemos decir que estamos libres de químicos, libres de herbicidas, absolutamente. Yo digo, cada banano que me como de esta finca tiene el potasio natural y tiene todo lo que la tierra me ofrece.
Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, my dear friend and colleague Ibrahim Thiaw. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year's Desertification and Drought Day is like no other before it. It comes at a time of profound change. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, more and more countries are considering shifting from fossil fuel towards a greener, low-carbon economy. It is also the start of a global movement over the next 10 years to restore degraded lands. Guided by the trusted expertise of the UN Environment Programme and the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is the start of a global mission to repair billions of hectares of land. Generation restoration means bringing back plants and animals from the brink of extinction, from the peaks of mountains to the depths of the sea. It will help to rally communities across the globe to revive our natural world, and major efforts are already underway. For instance, look to the Great Green Wall Initiative led by the African Union and championed by UNCCD. As a result, millions of hectares of land have been rehabilitated or are under restoration in the Sahel region. Such efforts will yield enormous benefits. Restoring 350 million hectares of degraded lands by the year 2020 could also remove an extraordinary 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, helping to also slow climate change. It would help to bring back an extraordinary array of biodiversity, including animals and insects. It will help to ensure food and water security for millions of people, and it will reduce poverty and create new green jobs that will pay better. It will help to protect against disasters and provide a natural buffer against pandemics like COVID-19. Indeed, ecosystem restoration is intrinsically linked to our efforts to achieve the targets set by the Paris Agreement and to make progress on many of the global goals. Perhaps most importantly, it is also about a fundamental change in mindset. No longer can we take as much as we can from the earth for a quick profit. It is about understanding what is in the best interests of both people and planet and future generations. All members of the global community must treat land as a limited and precious natural resource and indeed capital for our economies. At the United Nations Development Programme, we are proud to support the vital work of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. For instance, together we supported 58 countries as they work to develop land degradation neutrality targets, a crucial framework to help tackle desertification and restore degraded land and soil. Building upon this, UNDP will now support at least 30 countries to implement their land degradation neutrality targets. Working with local communities, our efforts aim to restore at least 10 million hectares of land across the world over the next decade. That is an area greater than Morocco. And we would like to think of this as UNDP's ecosystem restoration commitment, our promise to each other and to future generations. Young people, women and Indigenous people who have acted as defenders of these ecosystems for generations will lead the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Groups and individuals can join an initiative already underway or start their own. The simple fact is, the healthier ecosystems are, the healthier the planet is and its people. Therefore, we must all be part of generation restoration. Thank you.
Dear colleagues and friends, Land degradation is a cause and a consequence of climate change. And land restoration is a solution to climate change. The dedication of this year, Desertification and Drought Day, to restoring healthy lands recognize the enormous potential of land restoration to protect people, their livelihood, and the planet. More than 2 billion hectares of land around the world have been degraded, leading to increased desertification and reductions in land productivity. And by 2050, 4 billion of the world's population will be living in dry lands, an increase of 43%, with many of those living in poverty. This is why nature-based climate solutions are a priority for GCF. GCF portfolio includes projects tackling dryland degradation through sustainable grazing in countries ranging from Mongolia to Botswana. We are also supporting Sahel countries participating in the Great Green Wall initiative, stretching across Africa from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east. For example, we are working with IFAD to roll out a $82.8 million program that will help smallholder farmers access agricultural insurance to enhance climate resilience in 7 Sahel countries. There's never been a more important time to invest in restoring degraded land. The strong social and economic benefits of land restoration that they bring are vital as developing countries recover from the economic impact of COVID-19.